Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not looking at markets or tech. We're looking at the UK's own operating system, its constitution.
Right, and it's something people often think of as, dusty or set in stone.
But it's not. The truth is, the UK's constitutional architecture has gone through this quiet revolution over the last 30 years or so.
It absolutely has. So today we're doing a deep dive into that transformation, which was really driven by two massive interconnected forces.
Okay, what are they?
First, the transfer of power out from Westminster, which we call devolution. And second, the embedding of a really powerful framework of human rights and civil liberties.
So our mission today is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding this new landscape. It's complex.
It is. We need to get to grips with the legal differences between England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
And how your basic rights are protected and sometimes even challenged depending on, where in the UK you happen to live. This is where politics, law, and national identity all collide.
A fascinating collision.
So let's start with devolution. This wasn't some big bang event in 1998, was it? It was more of an acceleration of something that was already happening.
That's a great way to put it. The historical context is vital. I mean, Northern Ireland had its own devolved government from 1921 right up to 1972.
And there was administrative devolution long before that.
Exactly. Things like health and education in Scotland, that goes back to the 1800s. But the constitutional earthquake, the real shift, that came with the 1998 Act.
Which set up the Scottish Parliament, the Senedd in Wales, and the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Yes. And the key thing to understand is that this wasn't just about moving government departments around. This was about transferring real, defined legislative powers.
And the consequence of that is something I think most people don't fully appreciate. We now have 3 distinct legal jurisdictions inside one country.
Precisely. You have the legal system of England and Wales, then a separate one in Northern Ireland, and another one in Scotland.
And we're not talking about small differences here.
No, not at all. We're talking about completely distinct legal cultures, separate court systems, different rules for everything from property law to criminal procedure.
So if you move from, say, Cardiff to Glasgow, you are literally entering a different legal world.
You really are. It's a foundational consequence of devolution.
Yeah.
The UK Constitution is just not a single unitary thing anymore, not in the way it was before 1998.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics. The way power was handed over isn't the same everywhere. Scotland and Wales use something called the reserved powers model. What does that mean in sort of practical terms?
It's incredibly powerful because it flips the constitutional assumption on its head.
How so?
Well, under the reserved powers model, the devolved legislature can make laws on anything unless it's specifically listed as reserved for the UK Parliament.
So reserved matters are the big UK-wide things.
That's right. Defense, foreign policy, the Crown, big economic policy, social security, things like that.
So the default setting is, we can do this unless London explicitly says we can't. That must shift the political dynamic quite a bit.
It creates a constant political tension.
Right.
It means Westminster has to be incredibly careful and precise when it defines what's reserved. Because if they miss something, or there's an ambiguity,
Then that power automatically belongs to Edinburgh or Cardiff.
instantly. It's a constant negotiation over definitions.
Meanwhile, Northern Ireland has a more complex system.
Yes, it's a bit different. Based on its unique history, it works with transferred, reserved, and also accepted matters. But the really interesting part is that the Assembly in Belfast can actually legislate on reserved matters,
If they get permission.
if they get the consent of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. So the dividing lines there are much more political, perhaps less rigidly legal.
Which sounds like a system built for negotiation, which, as we know, can sometimes be very, very difficult.
It relies heavily on political goodwill. But there's a constitutional nugget here that shows none of this is temporary. It's about their permanence.
Ah, yes, this is the bit that really proves devolution is here to stay.
Absolutely. The Scotland Act of 2016 and the Wales Act of 2017 legally declare that the Scottish Parliament and the Senedd are permanent features of the UK's constitutional setup.
So this is now a written part of our unwritten constitution.
In a way, yes. And the key takeaway is that they can't just be abolished by a simple act of Parliament in Westminster.
Even though Parliament is still technically sovereign?
Correct. They can only be abolished if the people of those nations vote for it in a referendum. That's a fundamental check on Westminster's power. It's a true constitutional settlement.
Okay, so we have these powerful, permanent bodies making laws, which brings us to the critical question. How do we know if a law they pass is actually valid?
That brings us to the legal gatekeeper, the concept of legislative competence.
Right. And what is that exactly?
Legislative competence is basically the legal test that every single piece of devolved legislation has to pass. If a law from Holyrood or the Senate is found to be out with competence, it's simple.
It's thrown out.
It's automatically void. It never was law in the first place.
So what are the main criteria for passing that test? What hoops does a bill have to jump through?
There are three main ones. First, it has to be about its own geographical territory.
Makes sense.
Second, it can't be about one of those reserved matters we just talked about. But the third one, that's where most of the constitutional friction happens.
And that is?
The law must comply with human rights legislation, specifically the European Convention on Human Rights, or ECHR.
This is where we get to that critical difference, isn't it, between Westminster and the devolved nations. It all comes down to the consequence of failure.
This is the constitutional aha moment. Like I said, if a devolved law fails the test, say it breaches an ECHR right, poof, it's void. Think of it like a bad check, it just bounces.
But what if an act from the sovereign UK Parliament breaches those same human rights?
The outcome is completely different.
Yeah.
Because of parliamentary sovereignty, our courts can't just strike down an act of the UK Parliament.
So what can they do?
They can issue what's called a declaration of incompatibility. It's basically a formal notice to Parliament saying, hey, this law you passed has a problem. But the law itself remains valid and enforceable.
And then it's up to politicians in Westminster to decide if they want to fix it.
It's entirely their decision. That single distinction, void versus incompatible, tells you everything you need to know about where ultimate power still lies.
Now, applying this competence test often falls to a pretty controversial group of people, the law officers.
Yes, people like the UK Attorney General. They are in a, well, almost impossible position.
Because they have two jobs at once.
Exactly. They're politicians, often members of the government, but they're also meant to be these impartial guardians of the rule of law.
That seems like a massive conflict of interest. They're the team's lawyer and the referee at the same time.
And that's the controversy. When the government's political goals clash with frank, impartial legal advice that might, sink a flagship policy. And because that advice is confidential, it's very hard to scrutinize.
So if there's a really serious challenge, who gets the final say?
That goes to the UK Supreme Court. They are the final judicial referee on all devolution issues. They often get what are called references, where a law officer sends a draft bill straight to the court.
To get a ruling before it becomes law.
Exactly. To check its competence.
There's a perfect real-world example of this, isn't there? The Welsh asbestos bill.
Yes. The Recovery of Medical Costs for Asbestos Diseases, Wales Bill. The Counsel General for Wales referred it to the Supreme Court. The court found it was out with competence.
And the interesting part is why.
Right. The bill was about recovering medical costs, which sounds like health, a devolved area.
Yeah.
But the court ruled that the way it was structured actually interfered with the UK's social security system, which is a reserved matter.
So Wales was unintentionally treading on Westminster's turf, on the financial structure of the welfare state.
Precisely. So the bill didn't become an act. It shows the system working, policing those boundaries.
Let's shift gears a bit. From the mechanics of lawmaking to individual rights, we should probably clarify the difference between civil liberties and human rights.
It's a crucial distinction. Civil liberties are sort of our historical, homegrown freedoms. They're defined by what the state can't do to you.
So Magna Carta, that sort of thing.
Exactly. The old concept that you're free to do anything that isn't explicitly forbidden by law. But, and this is the key part, they can be limited or even taken away by Parliament.
Whereas human rights are seen as something more fundamental.
They're considered a higher order of law. The idea is that they are universal, inalienable, and indivisible. They're not granted by the state. They're legal entitlements that the state has a duty to protect.
And the moment these rights really came home to the UK was with the Human Rights Act of 1998. What did that act fundamentally change for the average person?
Before the HRA, if your rights were violated by, say, a public body, you often had to go on a long, very expensive journey to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg.
A huge barrier for most people.
A massive barrier. The HRA revolutionized that. It allowed you to bring a claim for a breach of your human rights directly in a UK court. It brought rights home.
And it changed how all government works through two key sections.
Right. Section 3 forces courts to try and read all laws in a way that's compatible with the ECHR. And Section 6 is even more direct.
What does that do?
It makes it unlawful for any public authority, the police, hospitals, your local council, to act in a way that's incompatible with those rights.
So it forces public bodies to constantly think about rights in their day-to-day decisions.
It makes rights a daily constitutional reality, not just some abstract legal theory.
And this whole framework has led to some really stark democratic divergence across the UK. The policy differences are just staggering.
Take election systems.
Yeah.
For the UK general election, we use first past the post. But in the devolved nations,
It's a completely different story.
completely. Northern Ireland uses the single transferable vote, which is highly proportional. Scotland and the Senedd use the additional member system, a hybrid model.
So the very principles of your democratic representation change depending on which election you're voting in.
Absolutely. And then you have the most obvious difference of all, the voting age.
Yes. In Scotland and Wales, you can vote in their elections at 16.
The Scottish Parliament did it in 2016, and the Senedd followed in 2021. Yet, for a UK general election, the age is still 18.
So the law says a 16-year-old in Edinburgh is mature enough to vote for their MSP, but not their MP. A profound difference.
It really is a profound difference in your democratic rights based purely on geography.
And these differences, they flow directly into real-world policy. Devolution has basically created 4 constitutional laboratories.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And a great example is public health, which is fully devolved. Just look at organ donation.
Right, for decades, the whole UK had an opt-in system.
It did. But then in 2015, Wales became the first UK nation to adopt a soft opt-out system, deemed consent.
Which is a huge deal constitutionally because it engages very complex human rights.
Absolutely. Article 2, the right to life, and Article 8, the right to respect for private and family life. By taking the lead, Wales showed that this policy could be made to work and was compatible with the rights framework.
And that created a ripple effect.
A huge one. England changed its law in 2020, Scotland in 2021, and Northern Ireland in 2023. Devolution, in this case, drove policy innovation across the entire UK.
Another amazing example from Wales, one that's got a lot of international praise, is the Well-Being of Future Generations Act.
This is genuinely world-leading stuff. It legally requires every public body in Wales councils, health boards, everyone, to think about the long-term impact of their decisions.
On future generations.
Yes. It's designed to break that cycle of short-term crisis management that plagues so much of politics.
And it sets out these ambitious well-being goals, like creating a globally responsible Wales. And it even created a Future Generations Commissioner to police it all.
Yes, the commissioner is a champion and a watchdog. It's a completely new way of thinking about accountability that goes way beyond the usual 5-year political cycle.
Finally, we even see big differences in our basic rights related to our homes.
Housing law, another devolved area. The Renting Homes, Wales Act, 2016, completely rewrote the rulebook for landlords and tenants. It got rid of old, complex tenancy agreements and replaced them with simplified occupation contracts.
The aim being more security and clarity for renters.
Exactly. Now, the interesting thing is that the UK government had a report suggesting similar changes for England, but they chose not to go ahead with that kind of comprehensive reform.
So today, if you're renting a home in Wales, you are protected by a completely different and arguably simpler legal framework than someone in England.
And these 3 examples, organ donation, future generations, and renting, they really show that devolution isn't just about moving power around. It's about building entirely distinct policy cultures. So if we're summarizing the constitutional impact, I think we have to see that devolution isn't a single event. It's a dynamic, ongoing process.
It's permanently decentralized lawmaking power in the UK.
It has. It's fragmented what was once a unitary legal system, and it's fundamentally changed how our rights are created, how they're talked about, and how they're applied across the 4 nations.
It's amazing how fast a constitutional revolution can happen through quiet legislation. And that leaves us with a question for you to think about. The divergence created by devolution is now so deep that depending on whether you're in Edinburgh, Belfast, Cardiff, or London, your fundamental democratic rights, like the age you can vote, and your personal liberties, like presumed consent for organ donation, are all legally different.
They really are.
So, given that the UK Constitution itself is still technically a matter reserved for the UK Parliament, what does the sustained power of the devolved nations to legislate so differently on these core issues mean for the future unity, the shared identity, and maybe even the stability of the United Kingdom?